So what is DAX we discussed, and in the DAX what kind of new information we'll create we discussed, columns, measures and tables. And we are understanding when to create the columns. I said that we can create the columns in Power Query as well as Power Pivot. So when you create the columns in the Power Query, what advantages you have? When you create the columns in the Power Pivot, what advantages we have, we discussed. And then we'll discuss when to create the measures now. So we are done with when to create columns. The second one, or the second new information we'll create is measures. When to create measures. So when to create measures is the question. So columns can be created in Power Query as well as Power Pivot. Columns can be created in Power Query as well as Power Pivot, but measures can be created only in Power Pivot case. Measures, it is not possible to create in what? Power Query. Measures can be created only in the Power Pivot. So when you need to create the measures is whenever we need aggregate results, whenever we need aggregate results, whenever we need aggregate results, comma, whenever we need aggregate results, or whenever we need percentages, whenever we need to calculate, whenever we need to calculate aggregate results or percentages, then we need to create a measure case. Whenever we need to calculate aggregate results or percentages, we need to create a measure. So in simple understanding, when you have a table, in the table for every row you need one value, then you need to create a new column. So in the Power Pivot I have one table. For every row I need a calculation. For that I need to create a new column. Let me go and click on Excel, desktop backup, source files. Let me even sample superstore, click on open, orders table, click on load. So here, when in a table for every row, if you need one calculation, we need to create the new column. So sometimes to show the output in the report, we need to create a value for every row in the table. Whenever you need to create a value for every row in the table, we'll create the new columns. So when we need to create the measures is, so I said that measures will be created to get the aggregate results, complex aggregate results, or measures will be created using to calculate percentages. Whenever we need to calculate aggregate results or percentages, we need to create measures. In simple terms, for group of rows, if you need to derive a value, then you need to create a measure, guys. For group of rows, if you need to derive a value for a group of rows, when there is any requirement where you need to derive a value for group of rows, for every row when I need to derive a value, new column. For group of rows, if I need to derive some value, I can go and create a measure. For group of rows, if I need to derive a value, I need to create a measure case. If I need to derive a value, I need to create a measure. So aggregations means on group of rows we need some value. Aggregations always works on group of rows. On group of rows, if you need a value, you need to create a measure. Take an example. My client is asking to show what is the sum of salary we are paying for all the employees. sum of salary we are paying for all the employees. So that means for all the 15 rows, I want to show one value, sum of sales. For all the 15 rows, when you want to show one value, you need to create what? From group of rows, when you need a value, I said that you need to create a measure, guys. You need to create a measure. Whenever I need to derive some aggregate results or percentages, we need to create measure. So sometimes I want to get sum of salary. To get sum of salary, I said that go to data view and select the table where you need to create the measure and go to the table tools, click on new measure. So whenever we need to create a measure, I need to click on new measure, guys. Just click on new measure. Just click on new measure and give the measure name as what? Sum of sales. So you can give the measure name sales, sorry, sum of salaries, sum of salary. I want to derive sum of salary here. This is the measure name, the new information which I am creating. After equal to, I need to write the formula. I need to sum all the values in this column. When you want to sum all the values in one column, there is a function called sum function. It's a DAX function. We need to use it. Sum is a DAX function. To the sum function, you need to pass one column. To the sum function, what you can pass? You can pass any column here. When you pass any column, what it will do? It will add all the numbers in the column. The sum function will add all the numbers in the column. To the sum function, let me pass the salary column. When I pass the salary column, it will create a measure. Look at this, sum of salary, create a measure. So, and if you want to see that measure value, I can just go and take one visual here. I can go and take one visual. I can drag this sum of salary column and it will show 39K is the sum of salary we are paying for all the employees. 39K is the sum of salary we are paying for all the employees. Now, the same results what I am showing here, I can even show without writing the formula. Now you are showing 39K is the sum of salary you are paying. For this, you don't want to do hangama here. You don't want to write any formula, you can get it. How can we get it? The same 39K I want to see. How can I get it without this formula? How can I get it?
Unmuted.
Drag it to the visuals.
Just take one card visual. Just go and drag the salary column on top of visual. When you drag it, by default, it will do what? Sum. So both are measures only. Even this is a measure, guys. Even this is a measure. This measure we call it as implicit measure. This measure we call it as explicit measure. So types of measures. We have two types of measures, guys. Types of measures. Types of measures. So we have how many types of measures? Two types of measures. Two types of measures. What are the two types is? Implicit measures and explicit measures. Implicit measures, and second one is explicit measures. Explicit measures. So what are implicit measures? So measure, when you want to go with measure, for group of rows, if I need a value, I need to go with measures. So there are two types of measures, implicit measure, explicit measure. Here, this is also giving the one value for group of rows. This is also giving a one value for group of rows. For group of rows, you are showing one value in both the places. So one we call it as implicit measure, another we call it as explicit measure. Without writing the formula, if you are deriving a value, it is an implicit measure, guys. Without writing the formula, when you are getting a value for group of rows, getting a value for group of rows, we call that as implicit measure, guys. We call it as implicit measure.
Existing column.
We'll use existing columns only without writing the formula. I'm not going to write the formula. Yes, you can even add it. without writing the formula, when you are getting a value for group of rows, we call it as implicit measure. So by writing the formula, sometimes we cannot get only without writing the formula. I want some aggregate results. You will came to know in the coming classes. When I want some aggregate results, without writing the formula, you don't get it. Sometimes we need to write the formula. So look at this explicit measure. Explicit measure. By writing the formula, writing the formula, when you are getting a value for group of rows, we call it as not implicit measure, it is explicit measure. Explicit measure. Explicit. By writing the formula, if you observe here, to get this output, I written the formula. I created a measure, I written the formula. This measure we call it as explicit measure. So to get this value, to get this value, I don't written formula. I just drag them to get this value. I don't written the formula. I just drag the salary column, and it take default basic aggregation here. Basic aggregations will be there. Sum, average, minimum, maximum. It takes sum. It is implicit measure, guys. Implicit measure. There are two types of measures. Sometimes we can achieve the requirement with implicit measures itself. Without writing the formula, for group of rows, I can derive the value. Look at this here. I want to get count of employees we have. When I want to get count of employees is nothing but for group of rows, I need one value. For group of rows, when you need a value, you need to create a measure basically, right? You need to create a measure basically. So instead of creating a measure, using implicit measures also, you can get count of employees. How to get count of employees? Just drag the employee number column, go and change the aggregation to count. Go and change the aggregation to count. How many employees we have? 15 employees we have. So without writing the formula, with this you are getting a value for group of rows, one value, we call it as implicit measure. There are some cases where we cannot get the value with implicit measures. We need to go and write explicit measure. I want to write, so I want to get sum of total salary, sum of total salary. When I want to get sum of total salary, what we did yesterday? To get sum of total salary, what we did yesterday?
Salary plus commission.
First we created a total salary column, and there we write salary plus commission, and then that column we used in the visual, we shown sum of total salary. You don't want to do that. For that, you don't want to create additional column. When you create additional column in the table, it will occupy more space. It will occupy more space when you create an additional column. Without even creating an additional column, you can get sum of total salary. This time, when I want to get sum of total salary, when I have a total salary column here, using implicit measure, you can get it. I have a total salary column, then with implicit measure, I can get it. So I don't have a total salary column here, but I want to get sum of total salary. All these values I need to sum. This time you want to write only explicit measure here. You need to go to data view, you need to go to the table where you need to create the measure, you need to click on new measure, and in the new measure you need to write the formula sum of total salary. If you want to get sum of total salary, you need to use function called sumx function. And in which table I need to write the expression. So in EMP table I need to write the expression, and what is the expression? Salary plus commission. So what it will do is, this formula will sum first salary and commission in the EMP table. That salary commission values it will do sum. Sumx function will sum this expression results. For each row it will do salary plus commission, and whatever the values you are getting, it will do the sum, guys. Now when I press enter, it will create a measure, and when you go and use it, it will show 41k. When I go and use sum of total salary, it will give what? 41k. So if you want to get this 41k, can we get it using implicit measure? No. You want to go and write an explicit measure. So for now, we understand that for group of rows, when you need a value or when you want to derive aggregate results of percentages, we need to create measures. And there are two types of measures. Sometimes some aggregate results we can get it using implicit measures itself. We don't want to write any formula. Sometimes we need to write explicit measures we need to create, we need to write formula and we need to derive it. We need to derive it. Measures are important one for a Power BI developer, guys. They will ask different new information. See, if they given a table like this, if they ask you to show sum of total salary, you want to create a measure, you need to know what functions I need to use, how to create it, right? Right. Now, so we know when to create a new column. So in the EMP table, for every row, when I need a value, you need to click on new column and you need to derive it. Total salary, salary plus commission, salary plus commission, plus center, salary plus commission, plus center. So for every row, when I need a value, I'm deriving a new column. For group of rows, when I need a value, I'm deriving a measure, guys. I'm creating a measure. Anybody have any questions? When to create a measure? What is implicit measure and explicit measure?
Repeat once again function.
We will get it. Don't bother about what function I used here. So we are not at, starting with functions. I'm just giving a high level idea. There are some cases to achieve the requirement. We cannot get it using implicit measures. We need to go and write the formula explicitly. So we will discuss about all these functions. What are these functions? How they will work, we'll discuss in the coming classes. Someone, Raju, what is that Raju question? What is the question, Raju? What is the difference between measure and columns? We'll discuss it. So I'll talk difference between measure and column. I already explained it, when to create a column and when to create a measure. In more detailed way, we'll see the difference also now. We'll see a difference between them also. Any questions?
When we create measures, we involve all rows or a group of rows?
You can even apply the filter condition also. If you want, you can pass all the rows. If you want
Here
only set of rows, you can write the filter. Maybe it use all the rows. It use all the rows, correct. What's your question? I'm not getting. It use all the rows.
Here we have used all rows, right?
Yeah, it use all the rows, correct.
Yeah, you said in the text sheet only group of rows.
So you don't, you cannot call it as group of rows. Group of rows means all the rows also group of rows only, right? I'm telling for group of rows. This is one row, this is one other row. 15 rows is nothing but a group of rows. All the rows are group of rows. Same.
So in this table, if we want to create measure using first 10 rows, it is also a group of rows, right?
Wait,
so that's what I'm asking.
Just wait. When I discuss about difference between new column and measure, there you will get the picture. So why I said that group of rows means, so the same measure when I use with the department number, I'll go here. I'm using the same measure here. I'm using department number here. I'm using the same sum of salary. So when I use individually sum of salary, it is giving for all the rows sum of salary it is giving. When I use it with another department number column, for 10th department values, it is giving sum of salary. For 20th department employees, it is giving sum of salary. 30th department employees, it is giving sum of salary. 50th department employees, it is giving sum of salary. When you create any measure, when you use with any dimension column, for group of rows, it will give the value. So when you individually use it, for all the group of rows, it will give one value. When you drag it with any dimension column, for that dimension value, it will give the sum of sales. You will get it. Just wait for a few minutes.
Measures will not occupy.
I'll discuss that point also here. Let's talk about difference between new column and measures, columns and measures. Difference between columns and measures So what is the difference between columns and measures? Let's talk about it. It's important. Fine. So
Sir, what is the difference? Sir, what is the difference between quick measure and new measure?
I'll discuss it. At the end of the DAX, I'll discuss what is quick measure. You'll understand.
Okay.
when to go with quick measure, when to go with normal measure, we'll discuss.
Okay.
But Sunil, when we create explicit measures, the column will not be added, right? Only it will
Wait,
show
man,
in.
just give me some time. Just give me some time. Everyone's
Okay.
question will be answered now. Everyone's questions will be answered now here. Just wait. So unnecessarily I given time for the questions. Once after this, if I ask that, if I give the time, no one will ask that questions. Fine, let me continue now. Difference between columns and measures. So now for this to explain this, I have a Word document readily available here. I'll open that Word document and I'll explain it. So introduction to DAX. In there, I recorded what is the difference between new column and new measure, or column and measures. So what is the difference is, so we know when to create. First point is when to create the new column. For every row, for each row, when you need a value, we need to create a new column. When to create a measure, to calculate aggregates and percentages, we need to create a measure. Or for group of rows, if you need a value, if you need one value, we need to create a measure. For group of rows, when you need a value, we need to create a measure. So first point is when to create the column, when to create the measure. Okay. Now let's talk about the second point. When you create any new column, how the values will be calculated. When I create a new column, values are calculated based on information for each row of a table. So when I create any new column, here I created a total salary column, guys. When I create a new column, the values will be calculated based on each row. It will take first row. In the first row, it will take salary, it will take commission, it will sum them, and it will show the result. Like this, once it is done with first row, it will go to the second row, it will take the salary, it will take the commission, it will sum them. Then it will go to third row, it will take the salary, commission, it will sum them. It will show. So new column will be calculated based on information of each row. For that row, what values you have, that values it will do sum and you'll get it. You will get it, right? So when to create a measure? When you create a new column, the values will calculate based on each row. How the measure values will calculate? So when you create a measure, the measure values will calculate based on the information from any filter in the report or the field used in the visualization. So it is row context, guys. When it is calculating a value for every row, we call it as row context. Now when I create a measure, how the measure value will be calculated? I created one measure here. Let me add a new page here. I created one measure here and the measure name is sum of salary. How this measure value will calculate is, when I drag that measure to the visual, I am independently dragging the sum of salary. When you independently drag the sum of salary, you'll get sum of salary here. What it will do is, it will sum all the rows in that column and it will give the value 39K it is giving. So when you independently drag it, it will sum for all the rows. So, and even this measure value will change based on the filters, guys. Filters you apply. Take an example. I have measure value here. I have a slicer here where I can filter the data. And when I drag the job here, when I go and click on analyst, slicers are used for filtering the data. Basically, the slicer visuals are used for filtering the data. When I click on analyst, it will give sum of salary for only analyst. When I click on clerk, it will give sum of salary for only clerk. When I click on analyst, it is showing sum of salary as 6,000. What is happening? So what it will do is, in the job, it will filter analyst. For the analyst, 2 employees are there. When you sum the salaries, it will give what? 6,000. The measure values will change when you change the filter conditions. When you change the filter conditions, for managers, I'm paying 8,275 salary. For trainers, I'm paying 10,000 salary. How many trainers are there? I have only one trainer. What is the salary we are paying? 10,000, sum of salary. So like this, when you select the measure value, when you drag measure independently, it will show complete value. When you filter the data based on the filter condition, the measure value will change. Not only that, the measure value will calculate based on the dimension column also. I am dragging department number column. When you drag the department number column, it will show how many different departments you have, 10, 20, 30 and 50. And it is showing each department number. The same measure which I used here, I'll drag it here now. I'll drag it here. When I drag the same measure here, it is showing different values. When you create any measure, it will not hold any data, guys. In the measure, it will hold only formula. Measure will just hold the formula. Measure will not hold any data. When you drag that measure independently, it will calculate sum of salary for all the rows. When you drag it with a dimension column, it will calculate sum of salary for 10th department employees. For group of rows, it will filter 10th department rows. For 10th department, sum of salary it will give. It will filter 20th department rows, it will give sum of salary. It will filter 30th department rows, it will give sum of salary. It will filter 50th department rows, it will give sum of salary. Look at this 10th department, it is telling 8750. Go and see here. It will filter 10th department and it will do sum of salary for 10th department. 1300 plus 500, 6300, 6300 plus 2450, 8750. That is what we are showing. 10th department, we are paying a sum of salary of 8750. 750. So when you drag any measure with a dimension column, at that dimension value level, it will calculate the sum of salary. When you independently drag it for all the rows, it will calculate the sum of salary. When you create any measure, measure will not hold the data. Measure will just hold the formula what you written. When you drag that formula to the visual, so based on the dimension column you have there, it will execute. If you don't have any dimension column, it will give complete value. When you have any dimension column, at that dimension value level, it will give the data. That is what I mentioned here. When you create a measure, measure values are calculated based on information from any filter. When you change the filter, the measure value will change. Any filters in the report, the measure value will change. Or the fields used in the visualization, the measure value will calculate based on the column we used in the visual. Let's take an example. I'm creating another visual where I'm showing job wise sales. Each job, first I'll drag job column. When I drag job column, when I drag the sum of salary will calculate this time based on job column. Analyst, what is the sum of salary? Clerks, what is the sum of salary? Managers, what is the sum of salary it will give? So based on the dimension values, it will give it. So even when you add another dimension column in this visual, I can go and add one more dimension column called job. When I add one more dimension